and just my talky bit. Lovely. Is that coming up for you guys? Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the other Sower, isn't it?
Yeah, brilliant. Let's start from the beginning.
Not here, no.
Is that
It's
the
in
back
this
as well?
book, yeah.
Great. So yeah, session 3 is about observation and observing the world around us. And so, kind of your answers were about what you might do in London, are the things that you've loved and noticed yourselves. These were 2 pictures from last week. If you remember, I told the story of a man who survived in a desert after his plane crashed, and one of the ways that he survived was by being indifferent. That was this word I was trying to introduce, ignoring the things that don't matter, but then on the other hand, being really attentive and really watchful in order to help his survival. So he noticed that there was droplets of water collecting on his parachute, and he was able to use that to get moisture. So watchfulness or observation or attentiveness is like the other side of the coin of this idea of indifference. So being able to shut out what's not important, but actually really focus on what's important. I mean, that's an extreme example. That's about survival. This lady on the right, I do like this picture I showed. She is being watchful and observant and just enjoying whatever it is that's a parade or whatever that's going by, and she's not fiddling with her phone, so she's not distracted. She's focused, she's attentive, and just enjoying it for what it is. There's a kind of simplicity about it. Boredom can actually aid observation and watchfulness, and maybe part of the last year has been days of feeling a bit bored, or at least a bit fed up with the same scene, because we're sort of stuck in our homes or around. And boredom is obviously not always a good thing, but it can be a good thing, because it actually kind of, it causes our brains to sort of downshift, and we can end up pondering and coming up with ideas. And actually it's sometimes a time when people have inspiration, is when they're not busy and rushed and distracted. So there's that. I mean, this is a sad analogy, but prisoners are known to count the number of bricks in their cells and then name them. And there's a kind of, now that I'm here and I'm stuck in this place, I'm going to be extra attentive to my environment because I'm sort of stuck here. Also in the wilderness, there are no distractions, or less distractions, and often there's silence, which makes the slightest sound really interesting. You might have noticed yourselves, if you've been somewhere at night far from a city, the smallest sounds of crickets or a creaky floorboard, it sort of sounds bigger, louder. People who fast, Jesus fasted in the wilderness, they talk about then the taste of food being richer and more explosive when they do eat or drink. And maybe even in the wilderness, colors can become brighter when something catches your eye. So here are a few pictures of, if you like, my own wilderness observations. This is the first one is the blossoms on a tree in St. John's Park. And this was a few weeks ago. And I went out and the sun was just coming in at an angle that just lit up the tree. And there was this glow on these blossoms. And I knew that it wouldn't be like that, even in an hour. And it wasn't like that the hour before. And so I wanted to get a picture of it. And it was just, I mean, Marley is normally the slowest one on the walk, and I'm having to drag him along, poor guy, because he's quite an old dog. But this time he was trying to drag me home, and I was just wanting to stay by the tree. Then we went to Osterley Park when it was all, very cold, and Caris was just really, really fascinated by frozen droplets of water, and she kept finding icicles and little droplets like this one, and we were trying to find a way to picture it. And then the last picture, someone came to the door, and I said, spoke to them, And I noticed, I mean, the view from your front door is one of the most common things you see. You just see it every time you step out of the house. And, you know, St. John's Road is beautiful and all, but it's not particularly awe-inspiring. But I noticed on the roof over the road that the sun was melting the frost, but the shadow was keeping the frost intact. And there was this little line of white where the shadow was receding, but the sun hadn't melted it. I don't know, I just was fascinated, and I quickly snapped a picture. And it's that I'm trying, I'm saying I'm a novice at it, but I'm trying to develop this sort of finding the wonder and finding that the small things actually are really amazing, and the detail and the joy and is right there, even in lockdown and even in the sort of same more or less surroundings of where we live. There are still wonderful things right in front of our nose. There's some quote about a famous professor who said that to his students, I went exploring all summer, and they said, where did you go? And he said, well, I didn't get more than halfway down the garden path, you know, because of all the things he discovered just a few meters from his front door. That's the sort of theme that might be in the background of our paintings today, observation and watchfulness. Let me read the first.
Was that really a cat in the reflected in the icicle?
I don't. It looks like a very observant Brian, and that's attention to
that's
detail.
amazing photograph.
Yeah, it wasn't, as far as I'm aware, an actual cat, but it looks like it.
Yes, isn't it? Yes.
Amazing. I like that. Well, anyway, I'll read the parable of the sower, Matthew 13. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables. He said, listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen. And then Jesus actually goes on to explain the parable, which is handy. And I've included that in the pack, but I won't read that bit. If you're not quite sure what the parable means, you can go and read Jesus's explanation. Now, for Jesus to have told that story, he would have had to have observed things initially. He would have had to have noticed what happens to seeds. You can imagine that he might have watched a sower, and he might have thought about plants and how they grow. And Jesus was, by all accounts, a very keen observer of the natural world and the world around him. So many of his stories and parables are really based out of the ordinary things. There's coins, there's things in the field, there's nature, flowers, birds, bread, rocks. Then there's sort of social occasions, weddings and work. It's the stuff that everybody else gets to see as well, but may have not noticed certain things. So Jesus seems to have cultivated or nurtured a life of observation. And I think that the parables reflect that, because these stories are amazingly observant about particular things that are happening in the world, and they often obviously carry a bigger message and a moral or a point as well. So let's turn to Van Gogh. Van Gogh painted the painting on the right, which is the Sower, the one in your pack, and he painted it in about 1888. I'm a big fan of Van Gogh. I think of him as one of our own. He lived in Isleworth in about 1876. So this is 12 years after that. But most of his paintings were painted, sadly, just in the final 2 years before he died. So it's and many of you will know that he was broke and had major mental health issues in his own lifetime, and only really became well known after. Van Gogh's Sower, he was fascinated by the paintings of an earlier painter, Millet. Jean-Francois Millet would paint peasants and farmers sowing. So here's that's what's on the left. 30 years earlier, Millet's painting The Sower is a famous painting as well. And apparently it was very controversial because in those days you were supposed to paint royalty and, you know, the elite, but Millet would paint the peasants, and he would paint them with dignity. So this peasant is unknown, and in the same way Van Gogh's is a dark figure. We can't see their face, but Millet's peasant is or Sower is this strong chap, and he's kind of striding across this wilderness, and he's sowing. And Van Gogh liked that, and then he sort of you know, was inspired by it in his own paintings. So Van Gogh's one, he was pleased with it. Apparently, he wrote in a letter, and he signed it, which isn't something he normally did or always did with his paintings. He judged it a success. So let's look a little bit more at Van Gogh's one. Just a few things to note. Again, there's that sower. Who is the sower? He's a dark figure. We can't quite make out who it is. You know, is it us? Is it God? Or is it Jesus? One clue is that there's this large, massive sun right behind the sower's head, and it's like almost like a halo, which makes the sower a sort of silhouette on the one hand, but a kind of a saint maybe on the other. I meant to say actually that farmers, shepherds, sowers, they are people of the wilderness. Their job means that they have to be alone, often for many hours. They're in the wilderness not for a retreat or a break. It's their work, and it can be monotonous and hard, as well as beautiful. So there's a sort of sense of the wilderness in this painting, because there's no other people around, and there are just fields and fields that this sower has had to go up and down. They're an interesting color, sort of lavender, and the sky is an interesting color as well. I think the one little bit I read thought this was likely to be a sunset rather than a sunrise. He's been doing his work all day. The tree, now that's an interesting addition. It looks like it's almost, you know, stuck on top. We don't even see its root or where it meets the ground, but the tree is very intriguing. I didn't mean for that to be a pun. Anyway, it is blossoming, so it suggests life. You know, the seeds will bear fruit, a bit like the parable. On the other hand, it's been heavily, I think the word is pollarded. I'm not particularly an expert, but it's been pruned back so that it looks like it's not, you know, full of leaves. It looks like it in the winter you might think it was dead. It's a weird mixture of dead and alive, and it's got these little shoots that are springing off, if you can see, and so, some of the shoots actually, or one of them, crosses over the sun. Now I think that the people have wondered about this tree right at the front of the picture, and maybe that difference between a tree that might be or might not be fruitful is alluding to the parable itself. Is the seed going to be good seed that has a big harvest? I'm wondering as well that a tree which is more red, with that some of that particular shape, you know, it begins maybe to think about the cross of Jesus, which was a place of death and life as well. So you know, maybe I'm getting a bit over theological, but I'm pretty sure that Van Gogh would have had that in mind. He was quite a religious person and also well schooled in the Bible. And so there's Van Gogh's Sower, and I quite like it, and I find it intriguing. I'm curious to know what you guys think. Let me just mention these other paintings as well, and so the readings to go with those. Matthew 6:27. Can any of you by worrying add a single hour to your span of life? And why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. Again, it's a saying of Jesus. And another saying of Jesus is the other one. A scribe approached Jesus and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus said, "Foxes have holes, Birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So again, parables or sayings of Jesus that reference the natural world. Now, these next two paintings are by the same artist. His name is Stanley Spencer. And I found out about these paintings from a book, which I can't find. I may have even lent it to one of you, and I can't remember. But I think I remember enough from the book that hopefully I can share some of the insights by Stephen Cottrell, who's now the Archbishop of York. And he wrote a bit about these paintings. Let me just say a little bit about it. Stanley Spencer was a painter who was very much a committed Christian, and he wanted to paint some paintings of Jesus in the wilderness. And some people think that he may have had a plan to do 40 separate paintings, one for each day of Lent or whatever. In the end, he only did 8. And these paintings were finished around the time of the start of World War II. And they may have been designed to actually be displayed in the church he attended in Cookham, in Berkshire. Currently, they are on display in the museum in Perth, in Australia, which is very far away. So it's going to be a bit of a field trip to see them for ourselves. But he painted 8 scenes of Jesus in the wilderness. And his idea, which I think is a really interesting one, is that Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days, and he was watching, he was observant, and he noticed many things about the world and life, and he pondered. And those direct observations of him then fed into his sayings and his teachings. So here are the 2 paintings I think I shared with you. So the first one is called Consider the Lilies, based on that Bible verse that I read. Jesus teaches about the lilies and the flowers. How did he learn about them? Maybe in his wilderness, he was looking at flowers. That's the idea. The other one about foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, or has nowhere to call home. Did Jesus watch foxes going into their holes in the wilderness? And maybe that gave him the ideas for his sayings. So I like that idea, that the wilderness time of Jesus is a serving time. So let's just look at these 2 paintings. The first one on the left is called Consider the Lilies. Jesus is huge. He's vast. He's someone on Tuesday night says he's almost like a big billowy cloud. He's also a bit like a rock. And last week we saw that in another wilderness painting, Jesus was also depicted a bit like a rock, stable, secure, so on. There are rocks behind him, and it sort of mirrors his clothes. His posture, he's crouching over, and it's like a child playing. It's quite playful. He's just out and about, and he's just noticed these flowers, and he's down on his hands and knees, and he's really attentive to just 1 or 2, even though behind him is a field of them. Now they look like daisies to us, and the point is that they are very common things, and Jesus is just really fascinated. And also his bigness makes it look like he's caring for and protecting the smallest thing that's seemingly insignificant or forgotten, not to Jesus, which is actually a wonderful thought. There's some discussion in the book about the fact that when we read lilies, we have an idea of what a lily is, but actually in the time of Jesus, he's talking about the common flowers of the field. So he's really talking about what we would imagine to be daisies, so that they're actually more similar than we might think. So there's that one, and I do like that picture, and I'm curious to know what you guys think about it. The other one is the foxes have holes. This time, Jesus does his posture and his position is very awkward, and actually he looks like he's not comfortable. The foxes are at home. They're going in and out of their tunnel. They look playful. They look quite contented. But Jesus has no place to rest his head, and allusion to his saying. And I would suggest that actually, at least from the waist up, his posture is a bit like he is being hung on a cross. And what we have are some quite unusual details, and I'm curious to know what you think. He's looking at his right hand, which is sort of held out flat, but his left hand is sort of withered, and his arm is thinner and paler. Again, there's perhaps a kind of foreshadowing of his death. And again, this is from the book. It's not really something I noticed, but the fox's holes, those sort of big holes that they're kind of climbing through and popping out of, mirror the whole of the sleeve of Jesus, his billowing sleeve. And so where the foxes have a home, in the sleeve of Jesus is this big sleeve, but a kind of withered hand. So there might be some sort of clever theological point here that Jesus suffers and hasn't got a home, but in him or with him, we find a home, an invitation for us to have a home, like the foxes have a home. I think the roots above his head look a little bit like a crown of thorns, might do. So there's a few thoughts about that. I think it might be speaking of Jesus' own suffering and the fact that on earth he was a person without a home and he was ultimately killed. But he did all of that, or that was his experience in order that we might have a home with God. Maybe. I park that with you. I do think it's beautiful. Finally, this is another one from the series of 8 that I didn't include in your pack. And I'm just curious if anybody knows their Bible verses and their sayings of Jesus. This is Jesus in the wilderness. What's going on here? What Bible verse does this match up to? Later, Jesus will say something that will kind of reference this. Anyone got any ideas? Don't worry if you don't.
No, not that one.
It's not the cock crows, but
Not
yeah,
the cock crows.
good guess, good guess.
That was my guess.
Don't worry. It's not, yeah, I don't want to think you will be in a Bible quiz if you don't. When he's close to Jerusalem, he says, how often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under his wings, under its wings, under her wings. So actually it's a reading that sometimes comes up at Mothering Sunday, which is this Sunday, where Jesus actually says, I am like a mother hen who wants to gather chicks under his wings. And so maybe in the wilderness, he saw a chicken bravely defending its chicks from maybe other birds or whatever. Again, Jesus got those big billowy sleeves and different things are happening with his feet and hands. So there's another one for you. So there we are.
Can I ask you a question?